My name is Catherine Wells, and for most of my life I believed I understood what love and loyalty looked like. I grew up in a quiet suburb called Briarfield, Ohio. In a simple white two-story house with blue window frames and a maple tree that touched my bedroom window every spring. The house wasn't grand, but it was warm, or at least it felt warm when I was a child. I used to imagine that my family, my parents, my sister Alicia, and even my distant relatives would always stand with me through the storms of life. I didn't know then that they were only with me when I was convenient. Looking back now, it's almost unbelievable how blind I was. Sometimes it takes a disaster to show you the truth. And for me, that disaster happened on what I believed would be the happiest day of my life, my wedding day. The morning of the wedding began with a kind of silence that felt a little too heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. My dress hung across the old oak wardrobe in my room, shimmering in soft light. I ran my fingers along the lace, telling myself that today marked the beginning of a new life, one I had dreamed of since I was a girl. Even though my parents didn't offer many warm words that morning, I convinced myself that nerves, not cruelty, kept them distant. The truth was far colder. The ceremony was set to take place in Fairview City, a larger town about an hour away. The church was an old stone building with tall arched windows that caught sunlight like crystals. Inside, everything smelled of lilac and fresh candles. The wedding planner had decorated the pews with soft cream ribbons and small bouquets of white roses. The music played softly and guests chatted quietly while waiting. I stood near the altar holding my bouquet, the petals trembling in my hands, though I didn't know whether it was excitement or fear running through me. I kept glancing at the doors, waiting for Daniel Price, my fiancé, the man I believed I loved with every fragile part of me. Daniel had always been charming, with sharp blue eyes and a smile that made people feel seen. I had trusted him completely. I never imagined betrayal could hide behind such a pretty face. When the doors finally opened, a hush fell over the room so suddenly it felt like the air had disappeared. I lifted my gaze with pure relief, only for that relief to turn into a cold, solid shock that hit me in the chest like a falling brick. Daniel wasn't walking alone. My sister Alicia was holding his hand. They walked down the aisle together, not even trying to hide the way their fingers were interlocked, or the smug smiles stretched across their faces. Alicia's dress was inappropriate for a wedding guest, too white, too bold, too bridal. It was almost as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Daniel looked proud, as if he expected applause. My voice failed me. My hands froze around the bouquet. I felt myself shrinking inside my own skin, unable to understand what I was seeing. My sister, the person who shared my childhood, my meals, my secrets, looked at me as if I were nothing more than a foolish stranger. Then Alicia announced in a loud, almost theatrical voice, "Daniel is marrying me today, not Catherine." For a moment the church was dead silent. And then, one after another, soft chuckles rose. My family laughed. My uncles, aunts, cousins, even my grandparents, every one of them. My father rubbed his forehead as if I had become an embarrassment. My mother leaned in toward him and whispered loudly, not even bothering to pretend to be kind. "Catherine, leave. Don't make a scene," she said with a dismissive flick of her hand. I felt humiliation wash over me like a cold rain. Every face blurred together. I expected someone to stand up for me, just one person, but no one did. No one cared enough. The people I loved had turned into a wall of strangers. I walked out of the church slowly, even though my legs felt like they could give out at any moment. My veil brushed against the floor as I passed the aisle, and it struck me that this veil, meant to symbolize purity and beginnings, now felt like a joke wrapped around my shoulders. I stepped outside into the sunlight, but the warmth didn't reach me. Inside, everything felt frozen, yet I did not cry. Not a single tear. Because even as the humiliation tried to crush me, something inside me remained fiercely calm. Something inside me whispered that they had no idea who I truly was. They had always seen me as the quiet one, the less special daughter, the girl who never spoke back and never demanded more. They never noticed where I slipped away to in the afternoons, what I studied behind closed doors, or who I met during my university years. They didn't know about the work I did in silence, far from their judgment. They didn't know the truth about my life. They didn't know that I was not a helpless girl they could insult and discard. They didn't know that I was the silent owner of a hidden empire. Years earlier, while my family mocked me for being unambitious, I had helped build a tech investment network with a close friend of mine, someone they had never bothered to ask about. We built it quietly, cleverly, under a structure that protected my identity. The company grew, almost explosively, thanks to sharp strategies and quick decisions. Eventually, my name was hidden on the paperwork, but my influence was everywhere. My earnings grew past $18 million before I was even 30. All that time, my family thought I was living an ordinary, unremarkable life. I stood outside the church doors and finally breathed, truly breathed. The humiliation was real, but so was my power. The laughter of my family echoed through the closed doors, but for the first time, their opinions felt small, insignificant. Their cruelty said nothing about me and everything about who they truly were. I looked back at the church one last time. The doors remained closed, and the shadows of people who once claimed to love me danced behind the stained glass like blurry ghosts. I knew then that I was done being part of their world. I walked away from the church with slow, steady steps, not as a broken bride, but as a woman who had just discovered her own strength. They had taken my wedding day, but they could not take my future. What they had done to me would not end here. And they would soon learn that I was not someone they could laugh at without consequence. After the disaster of my wedding day, the world outside seemed oddly peaceful, almost as if the universe had gone quiet to give me room to breathe. I returned to my townhouse in Crestwood, New York, a place I had bought years earlier when my investments began to grow. It wasn't overly fancy on the outside, but inside, every corner reflected the life I had built on my own. Soft amber lights, thick carpets, modern art on the walls. Nothing in that home came from my family. Nothing reminded me of them. It was the first place that truly belonged to me, and now, more than ever, it felt like a sanctuary. I spent the first few days after the ruined wedding wrapped in silence, thinking deeply but not sadly. That might surprise anyone who thinks heartbreak destroys people. But betrayal doesn't always break you. Sometimes it lifts a veil from your eyes. I soon learned from a mutual acquaintance that Daniel and Alicia had gone through with their honeymoon plans anyway, as if nothing embarrassing had happened. They flew to Port Brighton, a charming coastal town in the United Kingdom with deep blue waters and winding old streets full of cafes and stone buildings. It was the kind of place romantic movies used in their final scenes. It should have been the perfect romantic escape for a newly married couple, except that nothing about their romance was perfect, and nothing about their honeymoon would be either. I already knew exactly where they were staying because I had arranged part of it long before the betrayal. Months earlier, when I still believed Daniel would be my husband, I had asked my closest friend, Marcus Halley, for help in planning something special. Marcus owned one of the most exclusive hotels in Port Brighton, a tall, glass-fronted building overlooking the sea, with suites that could cost several £1,000s per night. At the time, I only wanted a peaceful honeymoon. I had no idea how useful that connection would become. On the third morning after the wedding humiliation, I called Marcus. He picked up after the first ring, his deep voice warm, the way it always was when he talked to me. "Catherine," he said immediately. "I was waiting for your call." I told him everything. The way Daniel had held Alicia's hand. The way my family had laughed at me. The way my mother had dismissed me as if I were a child causing trouble. I didn't cry. The words came out smooth and steady, like water from a quiet stream. Marcus listened without interrupting, but I could almost feel the anger rising inside him from thousands of miles away. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then he let out a low, humorless laugh. "So they think they can humiliate you and walk into my hotel like royalty?"
He said, "Catherine, let me help you ruin their little fairy tale." I didn't exactly smile, but I felt something settle inside me, something like justice. "Do what you think is right," I told him.
"I trust you." He didn't need any more instructions. Marcus had always been the type of man who protected the people he cared about without hesitation. And now I realized he cared more deeply for me than I had ever noticed. Their honeymoon disasters began almost immediately. Marcus told the staff to move Daniel and Alicia into one of the older suites on the top floor, claiming the ocean view rooms were all under renovation. The moment they entered, the lights flickered. The air conditioner rattled like a machine ready to fall apart. Within an hour, the bathroom sink began overflowing due to plumbing issues that somehow only affected their room. Alicia complained at the front desk, but no one could find a free room. That evening, Daniel had planned a special dinner at the rooftop restaurant, a place famous for its seafood platters and glowing panoramic view of the coastline. But when they arrived, the hostess apologized sweetly and said their reservation didn't exist. She even showed them the list. Their names weren't on it. Another mistake, of course. Forced to eat in the lower cafe, they ended up sitting next to a loud group of tourists. Their romantic dinner replaced by spilled drinks and burned fish. Marcus updated me every few hours. I listened while sipping tea in my Crestwood kitchen, the same kitchen where I had once imagined cooking meals with Daniel. The version of me who imagined that was gone. The next day, Marcus told the hotel system to send a storm alert to their room. It was technically a drill, but it looked real enough. Alarms blared, lights flashed. Instructions to evacuate scrolled across the screen. Alicia, who had always been easily frightened, screamed so loudly the neighboring guests complained. They ran outside in a panic, only to find other guests relaxing peacefully by the pool. False alarm, a security guard told them with a shrug. Technical glitch. Another coincidence. But the moment that truly ended their honeymoon came on the third night. Daniel and Alicia had tried to take a peaceful walk down the coastal path. Marcus arranged for maintenance workers to block half the walkway, forcing them to squeeze through dark corners that echoed with the wind. Alicia hated the dark. She clung to Daniel the entire time, arguing, panicking, blaming him for everything. The romantic passion they pretended to have was replaced by stress, fear, and anger. They returned to the hotel arguing loudly, both blaming the other for the trip falling apart. Meanwhile, I sat on my balcony in Crestwood, the cool New York air moving through the trees, listening to distant traffic and enjoying the unusual peace of the night. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply watched as justice unfolded quietly, naturally, like the turning of a wheel. I didn't need them to suffer forever. I only needed them to understand something they never believed before, that I was not weak and I was not alone. Marcus called me late that night. "They're checking out early," he said, sounding satisfied. "They've had enough." I leaned back in my chair, letting the calm settle deeper into my bones. "Thank you," I said softly, and I meant it. But Marcus wasn't done. "Catherine," he said, voice lowering, "this is only the beginning. They will face consequences here as well when they get back home." I didn't ask him what he meant yet. I knew that whatever he planned, he believed I deserved better. Maybe for the first time in my life, someone truly believed in me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine that my story wasn't ending, it was just beginning. When Daniel and Alicia returned from their ruined honeymoon in Port Brighton, the world must have felt different to them, though not in the way they had hoped. Their love story, built on lies and arrogance, had already begun to crack. I imagined they expected to return to America and brag about their trip, show off their wedding photos, and act like the perfect couple they believed themselves to be. But life has a sharp way of showing people that choices have consequences, and sometimes those consequences arrive sooner than expected. They worked at a company called Sterling and Rowe Industries, a tall glass building in Westbridge, Virginia, known for its modern design and high salaries. Daniel always bragged about his position there, claiming he was on track to be promoted, and Alicia often said she was the favorite in her department. They thought of themselves as untouchable, the kind of people who believed the world should rotate around them. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that the company belonged to someone very close to me. Marcus Halle. Marcus had always been humble despite his wealth and influence. Even though his name was not on every wall or every paper, he owned more shares of Sterling and Rowe Industries than anyone else. In truth, it was his company. And when he learned how Daniel and Alicia betrayed me, he didn't hesitate to do what he believed was right. The morning they returned to work, they walked into the lobby holding hands, though with much less confidence than before. They went to their usual desks, settling into their chairs, preparing for a normal workday. But only 30 minutes passed before they both received the same message from the management system. Report to the executive office immediately. Daniel's face must have gone pale. Alicia's hands probably started shaking. Yet they still tried to convince themselves nothing was wrong. They walked to the top floor together, the click of their shoes echoing through the long hallway. When they reached the office door, the secretary opened it without a word. Marcus sat behind the large wooden desk, dressed in a dark suit that made him look even more powerful than he already was. He didn't smile. He didn't offer them water. He didn't even pretend to be polite. He simply looked up and said, "Sit." Daniel and Alicia obeyed quickly. Marcus folded his hands and leaned forward. "I know who you are," he said calmly. "I know what you did. And I know the way you treated someone I care about." They froze, realizing for the first time that their actions had reached a man who had the power to decide their futures. Alicia tried to speak first, forcing a shaky smile. "Mr. Hawley, we think—" Marcus raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "You hurt someone who never deserved it," he said. "Someone with a kinder heart than either of you can understand. Because of your actions, your lies, your cruelty, you will no longer be working here." Daniel blinked, stunned. Wait, what? You can't do that." "I've been here for 6 years. And I've been here since the building was constructed," Marcus replied. "You're fired. Both of you." The words hit like a stone dropped into deep water, silent but heavy. Alicia gasped. "Please, Mr. Hawley, this is a mistake. We didn't do anything to you." "You didn't," he said. "But you did everything to her. And this company does not employ people who treat others the way you treated Catherine." Daniel tried again. "We didn't know that she mattered," Marcus cut in sharply. "That says everything." He pressed a button on his desk, and security officers stepped inside the room. Daniel and Alicia were escorted out while trying to plead, explain, and beg. But Marcus didn't hear another word. He didn't need to. They were gone. "I didn't know any of this until later. On the morning it happened, I woke up in my Crestwood townhouse with sunlight touching the edge of my curtains. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, unaware that miles away, 2 people who had once laughed at me were watching their world collapse. But when my phone rang and I saw Marcus's name, I felt a familiar calm wash over me. "They're gone," he said simply. I closed my eyes and breathed out. "Thank you. You never deserved what they did to you, Catherine." His words carried something soft, something honest, something I had rarely received from anyone in my family. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me still felt disbelief that someone cared enough to defend me. It was a new feeling, strange but warm. A week later, I heard a knock on my front door. I expected a package or a neighbor, but when I opened it, my breath caught. There they were. Daniel and Alicia stood on my doorstep, pale, tired, and trembling. Their clothes looked worn from stress. Their eyes were red. They no longer looked like the proud couple who had humiliated me. They looked defeated. Daniel took a step forward. "Catherine, please. We need your help." Alicia swallowed hard. "We lost everything. We can't find new jobs. No one wants to hire us." And I raised a hand, stopping her just like Marcus had stopped her days earlier. "Why are you here?" I asked. "Because," Daniel whispered, "we thought you'd understand." I let the silence stretch long enough for them to feel its weight. Then I spoke, my voice steady, not angry, just honest. "You laughed at me on my wedding day," I said. "My own family laughed. You held hands in front of me and pretended I didn't matter. And now you want me to forget it?" Alicia's voice cracked. "Please, Catherine. We're desperate. We're sorry." I looked at both of them, truly looked at them, and finally understood something important. Their downfall wasn't my revenge. It was the result of their own choices. "I don't owe you anything," I said gently. Then I closed the door. Inside, I found Marcus in the living room. He had arrived earlier to bring me coffee, a habit he had picked up without asking. He handed me a warm cup and smiled faintly. "You handled that better than most people would," he said. I took the cup, my fingers brushing his. Something inside me shifted softly, quietly, but undeniably. He took a breath. His eyes held something deeper than friendship. "Catherine," he said, lowering himself to one knee, "let me give you the life you deserve. Marry me." My heart stilled, then warmed. "Yes," I whispered. And just like that, my new life truly began. Our wedding took place on a calm summer evening in Ravenshire, Maryland, on the edge of a cliff that overlooked the open sea. The sunlight stretched over the waves like a soft golden curtain, and the gentle wind carried the smell of salt and pine. Everything about that day felt peaceful, intentional, and real, everything my first wedding should have been but never was. I wore a simple, elegant gown, not for anyone else's approval, but because it felt like a true reflection of who I had become. Marcus stood waiting for me beneath an arch made of white roses and drifting greenery, his eyes warm and steady, his smile gentle in a way that made my heart feel safe. When I walked toward him, there were no whispers, no mocking eyes, no shallow laughter from people who barely cared for me. This time, there was only love, sincerity, and the kind of silence that wraps around you like a blessing. Marcus took my hands and whispered, "You deserve everything good, Catherine." I believed him. For the first time in my life, I truly did. When we exchanged vows, my voice didn't shake. My heart didn't tremble. I spoke with the confidence of a woman who had walked through fire and found something more precious on the other side. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt a promise, not just of marriage, but of partnership, respect, and protection. It was a promise that had been missing from every relationship I had ever known before him. After the ceremony, we held a small dinner in a seaside hall with glass walls that reflected the night sky. Our closest friends were there, people who genuinely cared for us, not those who appeared out of obligation. Soft music played, candles flickered along the wooden tables, and laughter filled the room like a gentle melody. There was no chaos, no staged drama, only a quiet joy that settled deep into my bones. When we danced, Marcus held me as though he had no plans to ever let me go. And maybe that was the moment I finally realized that love could exist without pain, without games, without fear. We bought a home together not far from Ravenshire, a modern glass-walled house set on a hill overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. It had wide balconies, open rooms filled with natural light, and a peaceful office where I could run my growing empire in silence. The house felt alive the moment we stepped inside. The echo of our footsteps on the polished floors, the crisp scent of new paint, and the distant cry of seagulls outside the tall windows all welcomed us into a new chapter. Marcus insisted on decorating it slowly, room by room, so we could build our life on shared choices instead of rushed decisions. I loved that about him, how patient he was, how thoughtful, how careful with the pieces of my heart. Together we expanded our businesses. Marcus handled the broader strategies of Sterling and Rowe Industries, while I focused on the investment network I had built in secret years earlier. But now I no longer worked in the shadows. Marcus encouraged me to step into the light, to show the world the power I had kept hidden for so long. My net worth continued to rise, reaching figures I had never dared to imagine when I was younger. The more successful we became, the more peace I felt, not because of the money itself, but because every achievement reminded me that I had grown stronger after being knocked down. My family never apologized. They never called, never wrote, never tried to repair the wall they helped build between us. Sometimes I would stare out the tall windows at the ocean, wondering if they ever regretted what they had done. But the truth is, even if they did, it wouldn't matter. I had spent so many years trying to earn love from people who only understood how to take, not give. Now I finally understood that distance from them wasn't a loss, it was a healing. Their absence gave me room to breathe. Their silence gave me space to become more than the girl they once mocked and dismissed. People often imagine that letting go of family is a bitter thing. But for me, it felt like opening a window in a stuffy room and letting fresh air wash through. Marcus supported my decision completely. He never pushed, never questioned, never told me to make peace for the sake of being polite. He respected my boundaries, honored my past, and helped me build a future where betrayal no longer had a place. Some nights after we finished dinner and the house was quiet, I would step onto the balcony and look at the moonlight dancing across the water. The waves, calm and endless, reminded me of how far I had come. I would think about that broken wedding day, the sharp pain, the humiliation, the cold laughs, and I would feel nothing but gratitude. If my life had not collapsed that day, I might never have seen the truth. I might have married a man who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone. I might have stayed in a family that celebrated my suffering, I might have lived a life built on lies. But I didn't. I walked away, I rebuilt myself. And I found a man who loved me in the way I had always deserved. Marcus would join me sometimes on those quiet nights, wrapping an arm around my waist. "You're thinking again," he would say softly. "Just a little," I'd reply, leaning into him. "About them?" he asked once. "No," I said, because it was true. "About me." Because the truth was simple. I had finally found peace. Not the fragile peace that cracks under pressure, but a strong, steady peace that settles deep and lasts. My past no longer held power over me. My future no longer scared me. I had chosen myself, chosen my life, chosen my happiness, and everything began to fall into place. I became stronger. I became wiser. I became whole. And in the end, I finally lived the life that I wanted, not the one others tried to build for me. Not the one that was shaped by their cruelty, but the one I created with my own hands, my own strength, and my own heart.